Anyone that's involved in web development knows how volatile the ecosystem is. It's like you learn one thing that everyone tells you is great, but by the time you get comfortable with it, then it's suddenly outdated or there's something better. And to be honest, I can't really see this changing anytime soon. Even now, with established frameworks like React, there are calls to move on to the newest and trendiest thing out there. Although I enjoy exploring new methods for tackling problems, the issue here is that once a couple of teams start adopting the technology, there's already a new trendy framework out there which prompts the noobs to start tool shaming. So one thing that is getting a lot of traction out there right now is the JAMStack. It's something that I keep seeing all over the internet, like on Reddit and different blog posts that I follow as well. So that actually got me curious enough to attend a conference on it last summer. Now this conference was probably the best that I've been at, or at least the experience was the best I've had at a conference so far. But I still left the conference feeling a little bit confused on what exactly is different about building websites on the JAMStack compared to traditional web development. So that's when I decided to do some further research, and the best resource I've probably had is this book that I've got here. So that was actually handed out free of charge that day by the guys at Netlify from the conference, and it was probably the best because it put everything into perspective for me. For example, it did a great job at explaining the benefits that the JAMStack brings to you, but it also explained how it achieves that and why it happens. So I think the book did a pretty great job at explaining it. And that's something I'm going to try and explain right now. Just as a quick note, I want to add that of course this diagram is a very high level overview of what really goes on in the web. I won't be going into other topics like DNS queries or TCP, just to shorten the explanation a little. So what you have here initially is your client, which could be something like a web browser, that will send out a request for a view. Now it might hit a CDN, but on its first attempt, it will most likely hit a load balancer. And essentially the load balancer will just figure out, right, which of the many web servers here should I route this request to? And so it figures that out. Once it's ready, it sends out a request to a web server. And at this stage, the web server is able to render out a view by applying some data to some templates. But it can't do that without getting data first from the DB. So once the data is returned, the web server can finally render out a view. And effectively, by the end of this workflow, our client now has a view to display to our users on the browser. Now this works fine, but the JAMStack actually abstracts a lot of this work away from you. Now, the JAMStack mainly involves a client and a CDN. And the way it works is the client will send off a request to get a view, but the CDN already holds a pre-rendered view just lying around, and that's ready just to be returned to the client to display to our users. You may be wondering how the CDN actually gets pre-rendered content in the first place, and for this you'll need a build stage. The build stage here is responsible for compiling everything down into static markup, and that is then pushed to the CDN. This is the moment where you can leverage APIs, which can be third-party services or something you've built yourself. But the main idea here is, by the end of the build process, what you'll have is all of your static markup being pushed out to a CDN that's ready to be served to a client. You can see how all of the abstractions would optimize the development experience. For example, you don't need to optimize any database queries, you don't need to mess with load balancers, and you don't need to configure caching on your server either. So if you are a front-end developer, you'll more than likely love this workflow. Right, so because the JAMStack puts a lot of emphasis on serving pre-rendered content, this just makes it perfect for making your own blogging sites, and that's something I want to explore. I enjoy learning new things to do with web development, and I just think blogging would be a great way to kind of regurgitate that information to solidify my understanding. So I've found a few technologies that can help me out with developing my blogging site, and the first one is Gatsby.js, which was developed with the JAMStack in mind. Now, I think I'll be using Gatsby for a number of reasons. First of all, you can see that Gatsby uses React, so you can develop in React. And I need to get comfortable with React because I haven't programmed in it for about a year now. Secondly, you can see that it's powered by GraphQL. This is something I'm really interested in because just from reading the docs of GraphQL, I can see that it's a very declarative syntax, so it's easy to read and easy to program during development, which is awesome, right? Also, just to add, I've seen that Gatsby has a large range of plugins that you can use. This plugin ecosystem here would be amazing to shorten the time taken to develop something, but I think it's important to add that Gatsby isn't the only thing that you can use. So if you're a Vue.js developer, you can use something called Gridsome, which by the looks of it is very similar to Gatsby. It's powered by GraphQL and you can use Vue to develop in it. And if you don't want to use JavaScript too much, there are other static site generators like Hugo, Jekyll and Eleventy. And of course, there's a lot more static site generators that can help out, but these are just some of the popular ones, and I'll be using Gatsby. So I think what I'll do now is have a read up on the docs for Gatsby, because I'm not really sure how to use it yet. But I mean, that's just web development, isn't it? So if you're starting off with Gatsby development, there's 4 main files you should be aware of, and that's the Gatsby config, which is located at the root of the directory. And what the Gatsby config is responsible for is just containing your site metadata, but it's also useful to import plugins. So this blog wouldn't be possible without the Netlify CMS plugin. Another useful file would be Gatsby Node.js. So I think this is one of the most important files. It's responsible for compiling everything into pre-rendered assets. So it can do things like dynamically create pages for your site based off of some data like markdown files. And so any logic you want to do in the build stage, you'd want to do in this Gatsby node file, which is just a Node.js file. It's not anything to do with React. So it doesn't have any logic to do with client-side interactions. So another important file with Gatsby would be the Gatsby browser file located here. It's at the root source of the folder, and it's basically responsible for responding to client-side events. So there's more info in the docs. So yeah, the Gatsby browser API file lets you respond to actions within the browser and wrap your site in additional components. And the last API file would be the Gatsby SSR file, which is responsible for server-side rendered stuff. So it lets you do some logic like altering the content of static HTML files as they're being server-side rendered, but I haven't looked into this too much. I don't think I'll need it, to be fair, but if I do, I'll catch you guys up on it. So I think I want to start developing the project now, and I've got a little design up here. And as you can see, we've got our intro here, we've got a few blog posts on the homepage, and I want to have a little section of technologies that I like to develop with, and some tags, of course, for the blog, so you can kind of organize what the blog posts are about. And just to talk you through the remaining design, we've got our blog posts here, and this is what the actual blog should look like when I'm done, maybe. Pretty standard, to be honest. So it's still early on in development, but I forgot to show you this to you guys earlier on. So you already know that the main way to get data in your app at build time is through GraphQL. So you can get data from markdown files, CMSs, JSON files, etc. So let's say that I wanted to get all of these data items from this Gatsby config file here. I can do that using GraphQL, but I'm quite new to GraphQL, so it takes a little while for me to structure my queries from scratch. But Gatsby actually gives you a tool that helps you structure your queries, and you can find that in the terminal over here. So once your Gatsby project is built, you'll have one URL that will take you to your homepage of the app. So you also have another URL that takes you to something called Graphical. So if you click on that, it gives you an online browser tool, which is basically an in-browser tool for writing, validating, and testing GraphQL queries. So I think this is awesome because all you have to do is click on some things on the left here and it will structure your query for you. Now, let's say I wanted to get data from the Gatsby config file. So I'd want things like author, location, description, and probably my GitHub, Twitter, etc. So the way I'd do that is just to go on Graphical. Then if I close this, that should remove the query, which it has done. And to get the site metadata from the Gatsby config here, we can go into Graphical and we can just simply select what we want. So we know we want the site object. We know we want site metadata. And as you can see, it's building up our query as we go here. So we want the author, we want description, location, and we want our GitHub, LinkedIn, Twitter. And you can see that it's structured our query just based off of what we've clicked on the left-hand side panel here. So once I run that query, it actually gives back all our data. So the next stage is just to copy and paste this query into our app. But first, to use the GraphQL query, you need to import some things first. So we'd want to import GraphQL, and we also want to import a React hook, use static query. And to use it, what you can do is just go inside your functional component. You can create a variable to store your data. Then you call the React hook, which is use static query. And within this hook, you need to pass in your GraphQL query. So we do that by calling GraphQL backticks. And what you can do here is just copy and paste your query from graphical. And just to see that this works, you can console log it. So if we save that, head on to our Gatsby page, there we go. We've got our data that we requested from the GraphQL query. So yeah, that works. I'm just going to plug in the data now into our app. Right, so I just thought I'd show you the progress I made just before other things like university started to take up a lot of my time. So I've got the basic layout and the content sorted. So for example, I've got my introduction, I've got the different technologies that I like to use to develop with, and I've got my different blogs set up here, which is sick. So you can click on a blog and read more if you want. But if I go back, the only problem here is that when I want to upload a new blog, I have to head over to my code base, and then within my blog directory, inside a subdirectory, I have to create a markdown file. And the idea here is that this markdown file will just get consumed by some JSX, which will just render out some HTML and CSS like you can see on the website here. This isn't ideal. I prefer to use a CMS, but thankfully this Gatsby starter code came with Netlify CMS bundled in, and you can check that out in your Gatsby config file. And all I have to do now is configure it. So I've already got a Netlify account with a site deployed at this temporary URL. Once you have that, things become a lot easier. All you have to do is head over to your config YAML, change the name of your repo provider. After this, you want to set up your repo name. This is just your GitHub username / your repository name. Then push your latest changes up to your repository. Then within your GitHub developer settings, you can add an OAuth app. Once you fill in some basic OAuth details, you can just register your app. And at this stage, GitHub will give you a client ID and a client secret, and you can use these tokens within your Netlify OAuth settings. So to do this, go on your Netlify site settings, go on to access control, install provider, pass in your client ID and pass in your client secret, then just install it. So at this stage, we've got everything configured. Just head on to your deployed site, go on to the admin route, log in with GitHub, and there we go. We've got a CMS where we can add a new blog, give your blog a path, which will just be the slug at the end of the URL, give your blog a title, a small description, and at this stage you can just type out the contents of your blog. So I'm going to do that in Markdown. Once you've written your blog, it's as easy as just clicking publish. What that means is Netlify will automatically detect, publish, and start building out your new project. So there we go. Netlify has successfully deployed our site, so we should be able to just go back onto our website and look at our new blog. And there we go. It's as easy as that. So just to wrap up quickly, I know it's been a long video, but if you have made it till the end, that's sick. I really appreciate that. And the purpose of the video wasn't to make a tutorial or a webinar. I just wanted to document my real experiences in a real project with the JAMStack. And that's because I know things move so fast in web development. I think it's important to know whether something is worth getting involved with. And if you're interested in the JAMStack, I definitely recommend it. It offers the benefits of server-side rendered apps without you having to configure a server, which I think's great. But yeah, I couldn't cover everything in this video about the JAMStack, so I've left some resources down in the description, including my latest blog post if you want to have a read of that. And if you enjoy watching software related content, then stay tuned for more.